Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&As, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. Hey Jason, how much more difficult is it to recover from a body weight movement such as pull-ups versus a movement with a barbell? For example, will it be harder to recover from transitioning from 3x10 pull-ups to 3x20 if I am able to progress smoothly versus progressing on a barbell squat from 315 to 310 with 300 pounds? Thank you, Jason. It's obviously going to be easier to recover from pull-ups or chin-ups than a squat because you're using less muscle mass. You're using less weight, less muscle mass, less compression on your spine. That's a no-brainer. That's like saying, is it easier to recover from a tricep extension than it is a bench press? Well, of course it is. Less muscles involved. Now, it might not be easier on your elbow tendons, but as far as your whole system, absolutely it's easier to recover from. You cannot compare a chin-up to a barbell squat. You just can't. And conversely, a chin-up is not going to put as much muscle mass on you or as much strength on you as a squat will, right? So yeah, it's easier to recover from, but it's also less beneficial overall. It's more beneficial to certain areas. And I think chin-ups and pull-ups are great exercises, by the way. I think they're some of the best exercises you can possibly do. Now, as far as increasing the volume, let's say 3x10 to getting strong enough to do 3x20. Obviously, there's a hell of a lot more stress put on your system with doing 20 pull-ups instead of 10 pull-ups. There's twice as much stress on the system. There's twice as much volume, even with the same body weight, right? Obviously, that's harder to recover from. But that isn't a constant. You need to understand that recovery and work capacity are dynamic. They're things that you can build over time. These are dynamic things that are happening. They're not static. In other words, your recovery and work capacity today is not the same that it's going to be later on. You can develop that over time. Your recovery is affected by your sleep, your food quality, your caloric intake, everything. All of those things impact your recovery. So in other words, your recovery is higher when you're bulking than when you're cutting, right? Because you have more food available to assist with it. Your recovery is higher when you're sleeping 8 hours a day than when you're sleeping 6 hours a day. And then there's the fact that we can build work capacity over time. So it's a dynamic thing. So over the course of getting strong enough to do 3 sets of 20 on your pull-ups instead of 3 sets of 10, you will probably have improved your work capacity and recovery to some extent by that point. The question is, has it recovered enough that you can do them at the same frequency anymore? And that may or may not be the case. That's something that you have to find out over time. All right, next question. Also, by the way, I've left my air conditioning on. Normally, I turn the AC off when I do voiceovers. Hopefully it's not too loud, but at this point, it is so hot this summer, and it's so hot that if I turn my air conditioning off, I'm going to be in a massive puddle of sweat. So, people are going to have to deal with it. If they want voiceovers, I'm not turning it off today. It's just too damn hot. So hopefully it's not too bad as far as the sound quality goes. But next question. Is lower back rounding during the deadlift or even the squat butt wink a sign of hamstring tightness or back weakness? I often record myself to assess my form, and sometimes during the later sets of triples or fives where fatigue sets in, there may be a slight rounding on occasion. It's nothing to really worry about, but I would like to fix it nonetheless. Thanks, coach. Squat and deadlift are 2 totally different exercises. We can't even, you need to be specific. My God, this is would be a 30-minute video. In most cases, a little bit of butt wink at the bottom of your squat is not a problem, right? It's not a problem. There are even people who've set world records who do it. It is a sign of maybe a slight lack of mobility that you need to work on. Work on your hip mobility. Practice third world squats. Practice sitting on a box so that you have your pelvis rotated in the correct position when you're at the bottom, and work on just doing that as even a form of stretching, right? Work on your mobility a bit. You might need squat shoes. It might be an ankle dorsiflexion issue contributing. It's not as tight hamstrings per se. Now, if you're doing it at the top of your squat, you are using piss poor form. There is no tightness reason that would cause you to round your pelvis forward or have the butt wink you're talking about anywhere on a squat but at the very bottom. If you're doing that, you don't know how to squat. You need to relearn your technique and your start position and everything. It's also unacceptable on the deadlift. Now, what you also need to remember, though, on the deadlift, it's perfectly fine to have some rounding when you're setting up. And if people point that out, like when they watch me deadlift, like, but you see that right before you pull. Yeah, because I'm setting myself into position. But I don't have it the moment I pull on the bar, right? I pull it out because I'm using a pre-motor unit select technique, and I drop down into the squat, and I do it on every rep. So that's a little bit different. But yeah, the moment you start to tug on the bar from the floor, there should be no butt wink ever on a deadlift. That is a sign that you don't know how to perform the exercise. You need to relearn how to perform the deadlift. You're not doing it correctly. That's purely and 100% technique. Nothing, there is no other factor but your technique involved. All right, next question. Hi Jason, with current discussions over whether the conventional deadlift is a partial range of motion exercise and whether it's all that effective for hypertrophy, surely it could still be a part of everyone's strength training program who's serious about getting as strong as possible. Would you agree, or are there exceptions? I don't think it's a problem for hypertrophy. Look, the argument we make with the deadlift is not that it can't put an enormous amount of muscle mass on you. It's that because some of the joint angles involved are partials, and it relies upon a lot of partial movements, a lot of static and isometric contractions involved, and it has a very, very, very high fatigue factor, that the fatigue to hypertrophy ratio isn't particularly amazing for the deadlift, right? That's the argument made. No one has ever said you can't use it successfully for hypertrophy, even the conventional deadlift, right? No one has ever said that I'm aware of, anyone intelligent. There's no reasonable argument to be made for that. The argument is that if you're trying to maximize hypertrophic potential versus fatigue, in other words, impacting your recovery, then the snatch grip deadlift and the deficit deadlift make more sense, particularly for higher volume blocks of training, right? That's the point being made. A person who doesn't train with really high volume is probably not going to have a problem using the deadlift as a primary hypertrophy exercise. And yeah, it is a fantastic strength exercise because it uses every muscle in the body. And interestingly enough, the reason a lot of partials don't induce as much muscle growth is simply because they have less potential total muscle fiber activation, right? They do, even with a heavier weight. But interestingly enough, with the deadlift, it seems to do really well. EMGs light up really well in a lot of areas that are still partials, like the lats and stuff like that. It does amazingly well in those areas in spite of that. And so we don't really know for sure that all those areas would grow better just by increasing the range of motion anymore with the lighter weight. The issue you get in there, though, still is one of total fatigue. It's about total fatigue. It is a taxing exercise, and that's the point, is that you have to very, very carefully regulate the volume on the deadlift, even for guys on drugs, and that's the point. It's not that it doesn't stimulate muscle growth. It's that we're making an argument of growth stimulation versus impact on recovery. All right, next question. Hey Jason, how is the development of any particular body part limited by development of the rest of your body? It's not. So for example, could someone get 17-inch arms while having no development anywhere else? And if not, why? One could do just a F-ton of arm isolation work, and in theory, that should work, right? A more practical example, does your leg development limit your upper body development and vice versa? Thanks, coach. In theory, you could do a ton of arm isolation and get big arms. However, you might not get very strong with no compounds, and therefore you might limit your overload and it might not grow as much. The reason you need to train the rest of your body to get certain muscles to grow is that you can end up with more total tension on the muscles by doing compound movements, and gain more strength in those muscles that will carry over to the isolation movements, even if you want to use a bunch of isolation movements. In other words, using no big compound movements, it will actually be harder for you to build 17-inch arms. In other words, if you do zero pressing of any type or dips, and you do zero pulling with your upper body, it is going to be harder to build bigger biceps and triceps by virtue of that over time. You might for a little while get the same growth, but it's going to limit your growth. As far as the other end of it, are you asking, does training another body part negatively affect the growth of anything else? No, absolutely not. It doesn't. The only situation in which, for example, your arms might grow slower as a result of training legs is if you're too poor to afford another 50 calories a day, because you use calories up squatting. You use calories up training your legs. You use calories building the muscle. So if you are on such a skin tight budget that all you can afford is 2 packets of top ramen and 1 scoop of protein powder every day, yes, the squats are going to limit your arm growth because you do not have access to enough nutrition to handle any sort of real training and recovery. And so you're going to have problems there. But barring such an extreme situation like that, there's no negative effect. In other words, cutting squats out will not make your arms grow faster. It will not help your arms grow any quicker. It will have no change at all towards your arm growth in any meaningful capacity, right? So if what you're asking is, will skipping a leg day help my biceps grow? And the answer is no, it will not. And no, by not training another part of your body, it doesn't allow another part to grow faster. The only reason you specialize and you back off on other things is because the other things you don't want them to grow anymore. You just want to play catch up. It doesn't mean that your arms are going to grow faster because you're training less lower body. It means that your lower body will grow slower and you'll develop more of the proportions that you're looking for. Because your arms aren't going to grow faster. They're going to grow at the same rate they're going to grow at from what you're training, right? Does that make sense? All you're doing is rebalancing. In other words, you're reducing your total hypertrophy just so that you can balance yourself. It's not that the other parts are going to grow faster just because you're training them more and you reduce training in another area, unless the training more itself had a larger response. But if you were already training them at their maximum recoverable volume, no, they're not going to grow any faster, right? You're not going to speed that up. But you will slow down the growth of the other stuff, which will balance out the look you might be looking for better. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative. And I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.